Starting off with something simple, but I still need to get into the habit of using, when I'm on my tablet, I always zoom out and back in with my mouse to move my canvas because I don't have enough shortcuts for the hand tool, but you can actually pan your view just by pressing or dragging anywhere on the navigator with your pen. Zooming back and forth feels like a slow and tedious process over time. You can click on the little Fit to Screen button on the navigator panel if you want to see your whole canvas. You can also have multiple canvases on the screen and use one of them for references. Sometimes my subview is too small to see the reference details clearly, so in that case I would insert another canvas instead of squinting at it. There's a little Open Image on Canvas button you can click to automatically create another canvas with your subview image on it. If you don't have the image saved on your computer, you can just copy and paste it onto a canvas and bring it over. I used to think you could only have one ruler on each layer because when I made a second ruler on the same layer, the first one stopped working. My brush wouldn't snap to the first ruler anymore. Turns out you can switch between the two simply by selecting the one you want enabled with Operation and checking Snap. Purple means on, green means off. The Guide Special Ruler can operate at the same time with any of the other special rulers as well as any other ruler. The Pen Ruler seems to be able to work with other rulers as well. I thought the only way to select multiple lines or points on a vector layer was to hold Shift, which is unusual because it's usually Control, like how you hold Control to select multiple layers in the layer palette. But if you drop down to Operation of Transparent Part, check Select Area by dragging, and select Control Point, you can actually drag to select multiple control points to move at the same time. It's useful for when you only want to edit certain control points instead of the whole line, but too many points to individually shift-click them all. If your background is filled, it will select the background layer, so in that case, uncheck Switch to a different layer. Control has multiple functions. As you might know, you need to hold Control to drag certain things around in the Clip Studio Paint interface, like colors in the color palette or the order of items in Quick Access. You can change this for Quick Access if you right-click, hover over to change order, and switch to drag. Now you can simply drag to select the order without having to hold Control, so it's a little bit more convenient. 3D figures are useful, but my issue was that we couldn't apply a hand pose to one hand. When you insert a hand pose on one of the hands, both hands change. I couldn't find any solutions online, but while experimenting I found out that if you click on a specific hand as if you were to pose it manually and drag the pose on instead, it does apply to that hand alone without it affecting your second hand too, so you can pose them individually. Hopefully I'm not the only one who had trouble figuring that out. As you might know, Auto Action is a feature that allows you to perform multiple tasks with a click of a button by recording your actions and playing them back. Double-clicking works the same as pressing play. I didn't realize this before, but you need to create the layers in order from bottom to top because it doesn't save order changes. It also doesn't save layer edits. So if you drew something on the canvas, it won't show after playback. You can edit individual actions after the recording by changing the order or deleting a specific one and re-record from the time you want without overwriting. You can stop recording and start recording where you left off instead of deleting and recreating it if you made a mistake during recording. There are useful default auto actions that are easy to miss, like bevel and emboss, or bright colors emit light, which is just glow. Drop shadows are commonly made into auto actions. This one results in a shadow layer above, so you'd have to bring it down, but they're very easy to do manually too. Holding Control and clicking on the layer image will select the layer contents. With that selected, you can add a new layer and fill the selection with the shade color you want. then blur it. You can also free transform this to place the shadow in perspective. Outlining is also a common auto action if you want to add it to your list. The reason why we don't convert raster layers to vector most of the time is because it ruins the quality of the lines, but we can minimize that by changing the vector settings. In this instance, raising the maximum line width, which increases line width variation, lowering the correction, which decreases how much the lines change from the original image, and setting the anti-aliasing to weak, which blurs the lines a little, made the resulting vector image a lot better. These wobbly lines can be stabilized later with correct line tools such as Simplify Vector Line, which reduces control points to make the line smoother and removes short lines. Redraw Vector Line allows you to, as the name suggests, redraw the line, which moves all the control points without changing the length of the line. You probably already know that you can change the brush shape, which is basically the texture of your lines, on a vector layer with the operation tool. There are a set of default brush shapes to choose from, but you might have not known that you can save the brush shape of any brush by going into Subtool Detail. Navigate over to the Brush Shape tab and simply click Add to Presets to add your brush shape to the list. Now if you go back to Operation, your new brush shape will automatically appear on the list for you to use. You can also use your saved brush shapes for figures, frames, or anything that allows you to choose a brush shape. You'll notice that some brushes are black and white no matter what your selected colors are. They don't change colors, but you can still use these by applying color with a gradient map. I would use one on the same layer. Just select the white indicator and change the white to any other color you want to convert everything that's white to your newly selected color. In the case that these are all on the same layer but they can't be the same color, you can separate each part with lasso selection and color them individually. You can change the hue too after they're colored. I found this out when I accidentally dragged to move my selection before clicking Scale Rotate, but turns out you can move the selection area by dragging the selection after it's made. I found this to be useful for getting the exact selection area when registering the selection as an image material to use as a brush tip. You can move the center of rotation during Scale Rotate. It's not necessary for illustrating, but I think it would be useful if you're animating and need to, for example, tilt the head or raise an arm. There are a few actions that affect multiple layers at the same time instead of just one. You can select multiple layers to move them together, which is extremely useful if you work on multiple layers and need to align them together. You can also put them into a folder and move or transform the folder instead of individually checking all the layers. You can delete a whole row of layers by holding Shift or Ctrl to check specific layers to delete. Surprisingly, you can lock transparent pixels for multiple layers too, even though you can't lock the transparent pixels of a folder. This next feature is one that I didn't know existed for the longest time and still forget exists, but I regret not using it every time because it's extremely useful, and this is the multiple layers eraser. You can erase multiple layers at once, so you don't have to go on to each layer erasing everything one by one. Part of the reason some artists don't use multiple layers is because it's tedious to make changes later, but this tool will make it bearable. To make it more convenient, we can set the anti-aliasing to weak and turn pen pressure on for the brush size. The cool thing is that you can also use this as a vector eraser to erase both your raster and vector drawings. To do that, make sure you select Vector Eraser and choose Erase Up to Intersection to turn on that convenient automatic effect on your line art. I keep forgetting about it because I'm so used to drawing with transparency to erase, but every time I edited a drawing after the coloring stage and erased the lines and color separately on each layer, I could have erased them together. After trying it out with Vector Eraser checked, however, I realized this eraser is much useful for raster layers or vector layers only, and not to be used for both at the same time because it's so easy to accidentally erase vector lines that you don't want erased. If you hold Ctrl and Shift at the same time, you will be able to make a selection area on the canvas, but this is different from the selection we always make by pressing M. This is the Select Layer tool from Operation that we can temporarily use by holding Ctrl-Shift. It selects all the layers that are present in the selection we made, so we don't have to go over to the layer palette to select it. So it has the same effect as holding Ctrl or Shift to select multiple layers on the layer palette, except we don't have to read the layer names or hide each layer individually to find the one we want to select. Hold Shift after selecting to add more layers to the selection. It's useful if you need to select the layers of certain parts on the canvas to transform, put into a folder, or when you want to know what layer something is on. Like when there's a speck of color somewhere on the canvas that you need to erase. Selecting it with Ctrl-Shift to find and erase, or using the multiple layers eraser will work too if there's no background. You probably already know that Ctrl-C and V work on just about anything from raster layers and vector layers to images and rulers. Holding Alt will work for a lot of tasks as well, such as copying layers, masks, and rulers. You can move masks to different layers by dragging it onto another layer. Holding Alt while doing so will duplicate it onto that layer. Because you can't copy and paste a mask the traditional way of Ctrl-C and V without duplicating the layer itself, Alt is the only option and it's more convenient too. You can move rulers with Operation and also copy and paste them onto the same layer with Ctrl-C and V. In the layer palette, you can move the rulers on one layer to another by dragging or holding Alt to duplicate them, just like layer masks, although showing the rulers in all layers might be a better alternative to duplicating because you don't usually need to have the same ruler on multiple layers when you can just use one for all. Here are some assets I recommend. The first one is a fill tool that I'm sure most of you already have. I use it to fill the whole figure for masking, although your lines need to be very vivid for it to work well. I don't personally use this tool, but Erase Along Edge is helpful for artists who fill in their colors manually instead of using a fill tool so that they can easily erase excess paint. Set your liner layer as a reference layer so that the eraser will reference it. Gradient sets and gradient map sets are convenient, as you probably already know. I thought I could use gradient maps as gradient tools, but to my surprise, you can't input gradient maps into the gradient tool palette, so you will need to get separate gradients for each. Sometimes this photo processing auto action will be useful if you want to use photos for backgrounds so that it won't look completely like a photo and you can paint on top of it. Versatile texture brushes like atmosphere tools or fine particled noise brushes always come in handy. It would also be smart to get weather brushes so you don't have to draw individual raindrops or snowflakes. The Map Blur tool has less intensity and more pressure sensitivity than the default blur, so you can use it for focus blurs. You can create this brush manually by tweaking some details, but it's there if you can't be bothered. It does cost 10 CP. These are really easy to get during daily login reward events, so you can wait around for those if you don't have enough, or you can find one that is free, or make your own by duplicating the default blur and turn pen pressure on for brush density and set the intensity of blur to fixed value so that the highest blur value is 5 depending on how hard you press. Lastly, if you struggle with laying out perspective rulers, I would try out perspective grids. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new. Let me know if you did. Bye!